So thanks everyone for attending. This is really exciting for us. We've been waiting quite a long time to unveil this new edition of our product. I'm really excited by our tenants. I'm actually quite blown away that there's this many of you that are interested in our product, so that makes me very happy. Before we get too far along, I want to start with a couple of housekeeping things. So we're going to run this webinar. I've got some PowerPoint slides. I've got some things I want to talk about first. We are going to do a live demonstration, and then we're going to answer questions. But at any point in time during the course of the webinar, please type your question into the question box. We'll queue them all up, and we'll answer them at the end. And we'll continue to answer them even past the hour if necessary. Those of you who are able are welcome to stick around. And those of you who cannot, that's all right. There will be a recording available later, and you'll be able to hear the answers to some of those questions if we run past the hour, which given the size of our attendance today, I suspect is quite possible. So with that, let's get started on this exciting topic at hand. So we're all here to see Collabware CLM 2016. Now, I know a number of you who are currently on this presentation are existing customers. You're using our existing product. Another set of you have actually been exposed to our product and you've seen it in the past. What I want to do is really kind of walk you through the genesis of why we've done what we've done, because when you see it, you're going to be quite surprised. And I want to talk about why we did this. And then I want to talk about some of the key things that we're trying to fill. And then we're going to get into the actual details and take a look at it. So with that, I really kind of want to start with the idea of why do most compliance projects fail? I'm sure many of you have been through compliance initiatives in the past. You've gone out and implemented possibly legacy systems. Maybe you've even done something on SharePoint. And probably a good chunk of you who have done that have experienced failure with those projects. Now, I believe there's a lot of reasons why these projects can fail, but I really boil it down to one reason, and it comes down to people. And it's because we ask people to do a lot of things in compliance. We ask them to learn a new way of thinking about their information. We ask them to take on manual activities. We ask them to really understand something that isn't necessarily part of what they're trying to do in their day-to-day activities. And because of this, we tend to fail. We ask people to manually classify content. We ask them to put something into this repository, tell us what it is, fill out some metadata, and if we ask too much, which often we do, it takes a lot of time on their part, and then they're just going to start entering like dummy values. They're not going to really think about, gee, do I want to follow all these rules? They're just going to start picking the first things in lists. They're going to start providing values that are like, meaningful to them perhaps, but meaningless to everyone else. And those inaccuracies build up over time. So at first you might say, wow, this project's going good. People are using everything. But over time, you tend to see this pattern, which is where they stop using it the way you thought because it takes too much time. And those inaccuracies then build a level of frustration in the organization because people are trying to find things and they're trying to locate content that they need to make their decisions. And because of the way the system is set up, because of the time that it's taking for people to put content in and the inaccuracies that are going in, it makes it really difficult to find what they're looking for. And that, of course, is taking time as well. So we're spending time trying to get the content in, and because it takes too much time, we're putting it in inaccurately. And then we're spending time trying to find it because it's in there inaccurately. So there's a lot of time wasted. And that further frustrates people because then when they finally do get around to finding it, if you've got multiple versions of things, which I'm sure all of you have seen or have, document A, version 1, version 2, version 3, version final, and definitely the last one, final. Those concepts exist in all of our organizations. And that can frustrate people even further because now I find it and it says it's the final one, but actually the final one is the one that's called final V1, and that was in a different folder. So then I go and make decisions and I'm basing it on outdated, obsolete, or superseded information. And without any sort of controls in place to deal with that, that just leads again to the organization suffering because now productivity has taken a nosedive. People aren't filing things because it takes too long. People aren't finding things because it takes too long, because the information is inaccurate. And when they're finding it, they're getting frustrated because it's actually inaccurate. And that whole composite effect really drives the productivity down, and it makes it so the organization that set out to mitigate their risk in the first place have absolutely done nothing. And in some cases, even worse than nothing. So this is really where we put our focus, because we see the world as, in order to succeed in compliance, you have to focus on the productivity of people. And with our first version of our software, we started down this path. And with our second version, we went even further and made some amazing, amazing achievements. But with this new version, we've really kind of taken it to another level. And this is the focus point of why we did that. So to give you a little background on Collabware, because I think it fits really well with the vision of what we're trying to do. Now, first, those of you who have had interaction with us, you probably already agree with this. At least I hope you agree with this sentiment, that we're not your traditional information management software company. We think differently, we do things differently, and we do it because we don't believe that following the past, when the past isn't working, makes any sense at all. We want to step forward into the future. We want to change things. We want to make sure that we're not repeating the same mistakes, and that if we're going to continue to manage information, which there is no escaping that concept, that we better do it in the most efficient and meaningful way possible, and we better drive new value. And this isn't the way the other companies think. This is the way we think. And we believe that great information management software has to be simple, seamless, and transparent. I'm sure any of you who have heard me speak in the past have heard me say those three words: simple, seamless, transparent, because that's been our mantra from the very beginning. Everything has to be simple to use. It has to seamlessly integrate with the way I work. And it has to be transparent to me, because if you start asking me to understand compliance or understand governance or understand any of those activities that are unrelated to the way I have to do my work, then it's going to fail. And we don't want that. Our measurement that we really focus on is user engagement and adoption, because those traditional records management or compliance initiatives that went through those failures as a result of people weren't paying attention to the key point, which is your success factor comes with how many people are using this and how many are using it regularly and actively. This is really one of the more important aspects that we have to focus on. And I think it's been lost in a lot of ways. I think it's been, the focus has been put on, well, gee, do we have the right features? Are we making sure that, we're covering all aspects of risk mitigation, and that we're addressing all of the challenges we face across all our business units from a need basis? And I'm not saying that that's not important, but if you go with the perspective of adopting or dealing with all of those challenges that your business units are facing, and you're trying to solve all their needs and all their requirements, and you forget about the main purpose, which is, are people even going to use this in the first place? Then you're setting yourself up to fail. And this is so important to us that everything we do, even half our product team, is focused on user experience. What is an outcome we've noticed now over the years is that user engagement and adoption is really driven from what is the outcome that the end users are experiencing. Is it a positive outcome? Did I find something faster? Was it easy to put the content in? Was this new system giving me value, like telling me something was superseded before me going and making a fool out of myself using it to make decisions? And if it does that, there's an element of trust that gets built with the end user, and the users start to rely on this system. And that's something that has been traditionally lacking, especially in the compliance, records management, ECM space. Trust has been one of those words that isn't really thrown out there very often. But we've seen that now happen with people who use our software because of this focus. So just some quick details. Collabware operates all over the world. We have customers, virtually everywhere. We cover all sorts of different industries. But of course, you know, the requirements that we're fulfilling are typically in regulated enterprise and public sector, which are heavy focuses for us. We've been recognized in the past for our role in filling the gaps in SharePoint and providing new features and being able to be a little bit more on the leading edge, you know, being someone that matters, as that first quote says. And this is something we continue to build on. And in fact, we've got a bunch of really great new recognition we've received recently that will be made public over the next little while. And I think it's been very powerful for us internal at Collabware to receive these kind of this kind of feedback and this kind of recognition, because, you know, in the beginning, not everyone believed what we were doing was the right thing, but I think it's proven itself over time that focusing on that end user adoption really is the right thing to do. All right, so before we jump into a demonstration, let's talk a little bit about SharePoint and compliance, because I'm going to suspect that virtually all of you use SharePoint in some fashion, and you're here for some particular reason that might involve something to do with compliance. If you were here to learn about, I don't know, social networks and intranets, it's probably not the right webinar, so I'll just watch that little attendee count maybe drop a little bit. But we're here to talk about compliance, and SharePoint is a key part of this entire equation. SharePoint is really great at collaboration, and it's really great at document management. But it's not that great when it comes to compliance, and it's because it's not a compliance platform. It is a collaboration and document management platform. Now, it has some capabilities for those organizations out there who have very simple requirements. I need to make sure that content in this folder is kept for this period of time, and then we delete it. Then it can work for you, and that's great. But if you have the kind of enterprise lifecycle requirements that I'm sure many of you do, you'll quickly find that it falls well short of the mark of what you're looking for. And it's no fault of Microsoft. That's not the business they're in. They're in the business of collaboration and document management. To take it to that next level where you're doing lifecycle management, well, that's why Microsoft supports an ISV community, is because there's a lot of different solutions built on SharePoint, and this happens to be one that needs to be built and delivered on top of SharePoint. It just doesn't do it on its own. But to get into the nuts and bolts of it, you know, what doesn't it do? So I'm going to go through a little gaps analysis real quick, and I won't spend a lot of time on this. I've got webinars I've done in the past. You're welcome to go to collabware.com and take a look, and there's some more detailed analysis on some of these things. But I think it's important to level set and understand what, you know, SharePoint can do and what it really doesn't do or needs to do. So the way I phrase this is it's kind of by degrees of pain. If we start at the top, it's not so painful that it doesn't do that. But when we get to the bottom, it is like life-threatening painful that it doesn't do that. So when we start at the top, we talk about compliance by location or content type. So those of you familiar with SharePoint content types, you know, it's your definition of a type of content. And it encapsulates the metadata about what you want to capture about that thing, and then you can have all sorts of different documents that are of that type. So you can choose to say all documents of that type can be managed with some form of compliance policy. Or you can say everything in this location can be managed by some form of compliance policy. What you can't do is both. You can't have both at the same time. You either do it by location or you do it by type. And really that itself is limiting, but the true limiting fact is the reality is different types of information don't necessarily differ in retention across the type. They're going to differ in retention based on the metadata that you're capturing for that type. For example, you can have an agreement document. And if you have an agreement document type, but you have 10 different types of agreements, they're not all going to have the same retention. The metadata value where you're picking what type of agreement it is, that might define your actual retention. It might define your lifecycle rules. So you really need metadata-based compliance. It's unrealistic to think you're going to have a content type for absolutely every individual type of content in your organization, because you'll be pleasantly surprised, I'm sure. If you look, you probably have a lot more than you think. So you need to have this aggregation of your content types where one type supports multiple documents, but the metadata itself can provide the delineation between how we deal with one and another. Another challenge is that we have this concept of in-place and record center. So for those of you who are maybe unfamiliar, you can have a team site in SharePoint. You can have that team site contain records, or you can have a record center site which can contain records. So what that means is I can either say, I work on this team site, and when I'm done working on something, I'm going to make it a record right here, and it's going to live out its life right here. Or I can say, when I'm done working on this thing, I'm going to send it to the SharePoint Record Center. I might leave a link behind. I might copy it, I might move it, I might leave a link behind, but there will be another document somewhere in another location. Individually, there's nothing wrong with either approach, but the reality is for end users, when you move a document, no matter whether you're leaving a link behind or taking a copy or moving, you have now compounded your problem from a user experience perspective, because what I'm looking for is not where I work. That's not seamless. So if you leave it in place, it's seamless, easy to find, easy to use, very powerful experience. Except over time, as more and more content builds up and isn't going anywhere, my accuracy starts to drop, because now I've got a whole bunch of different stuff in this one spot, and not all of it is relevant to active business needs. So what you really need is to support both in different stages. Maybe we take that agreement scenario. For certain types of agreements, we're going to refer to them pretty regularly after the first year. And then after that, we don't really refer to them that much anymore. So it's okay to go ahead and move them to a centralized archive. That keeps my site clean and relevant, makes it very useful for my active purposes, very seamless to how I work. And then if I need to go find that, it's in the archive, and it can be made available there. So you really need to have both. Having an or equation isn't very helpful in the user experience. You also need to be able to manage case files, like the idea of having one thing that includes lots of documents. So if we take, again, a legal matter as an example, you're going to have a lot of different documents related to this legal matter. So in SharePoint, you got a couple options. You can spin up a site and put all those documents on that site, and you can manage all that stuff there, and that kind of works. But then you can't really do anything with the site after the fact. You can kind of delete it, but you can't really like archive. You can't move it to the record center or anything. And if there's items that are not on that site that are related to this thing, then there's no relationship between them. And what if that thing shouldn't have a site? What if it's an employee file? You wouldn't have a site for an employee file. So you might use a document set or a folder. But again, what if those documents aren't all in that one spot? An employee file is going to have stuff for HR, for finance, for legal. It might be in all sorts of different parts in SharePoint. So you really need something that's going to unify all that content, no matter where it lives, under one umbrella that can be managed from a lifecycle perspective. SharePoint also only supports time-based retention. And those of you here who are on this presentation, I'm sure many of you understand and know that you're going to have a vast majority of your retention schedule is going to be based on events. And there's no concept of events in SharePoint. So now we're in that mid-pain point, right? This is kind of getting a little painful, because now I got a lot of customization I got to do to support the concept of events, which is pervasive throughout my retention schedule. So you really need to be able to deal with that event-based concept, and that takes customization of SharePoint. Now, SharePoint also only supports the idea of a sequential information policy. So when you do finally get around to whether you've kind of bundled your way through those first few items, and now you're saying, okay, I'm going to manage the life cycle of this content. I've got everything else figured out. Then I can do it sequentially. I can do this thing, and then I can have it for a period of time, and then I can have it for another period of time, and then I can maybe move it. But the reality is that's not how business processes work. They don't just go in one line. They have branches. They have decisions. They have things that happen. And so you'll end up then having to implement some workflow. So now that's a new addition you got to make. And you need to be able to add this concept of workflow. But the problem is the workflow tools that are out there are all based on SharePoint objects, single objects, and start-stop type behavior. We're talking about retention that could go on for years, decades. How do we manage that? So that gets pretty painful. And the audit logs is our next one. So in SharePoint, the audit log system it's unreadable. It's not something, unless you're technical, you're not really going to be able to do much with it. It's also location-based, which is really the bigger problem. If I turn on auditing, I get auditing for that site collection. So that's great. In that site collection, I will know everyone who's viewing things and doing things. And there's a lot of limitations around the auditing, around how it's creating content, taking up content space where you should be using that for content. It's a rolling log. It's not keeping your archives. I mean, there's a lot of other things about this that are very painful, but I find the most painful one is the location, because if you're trying to track audit, and it's actually called audit tracking, it's not just audit viewing, it's audit tracking. I need to track the behavior of something or someone over locations, and that's not possible with SharePoint. So if I want to look at, for example, I've got some high profile executive just left the organization, went to a competitor, we need to go and find all the documents that that individual was looking at in the last 90 days so that we can determine whether or not there's any sort of compromise that we need to be aware of. That's not possible with SharePoint. I mean, it's possible, but believe me, the pain is not going to be worth it. So that's a big issue. We need to have that, because this is part of compliance. Compliance isn't just let's manage our content. Compliance is about managing how that content's used, who's using it, who has access to it, who viewed it, who didn't view it. That's part of this, and we need to be able to support that. We are not going to make paper go away. Not anytime soon. SharePoint doesn't understand physical records. So now we're in a pretty painful thing. So I can have my electronic records managed, but I got to now still use something else for physical. If I'm going to do a legal hold, or I've got a case or something like that, now I've got two systems I got to manage, right? So the paper documents are being managed separately from the electronic ones in two different systems. That's not mitigating risk. That's actually compounding risk. So you really need to be able to manage both in one spot and be able to have it all under the same policy and all under the same rules and life cycle, and have it available for users to search and find and enact a circulation process on it so that you can actually retrieve those items and have chain of custody tracking and all that wonderful stuff. So this is a big pain, but nothing compares to this very last pain. The very last pain is the most painful. And the way SharePoint disposition works is that disposition occurs on a per item basis, and it's a workflow that takes 7 clicks, and you'll get an email each time that workflow starts. So if you have 10,000 items that have come up for the end of their retention, they need to be approved for disposition, that next day you will receive 10,000 emails. And each of those emails will require you to do 7 clicks, 70,000 clicks to get rid of 10,000 items. It is absolutely and completely unusable in that scenario. Every single organization I have ever encountered in the entire history of myself working with SharePoint and specifically records management, they only do this once, and they realize that next day that they have to turn it off. So doing disposition approval in SharePoint is not realistic at all. What you need is a bulk disposition review system. Give me those 10,000 items, send me one email, or maybe send a couple participants one email, and let's go through and do our review, get our sign off, track our disposition certificate, and then know that we did a defensible disposition process and that we only got a few emails and we dealt with 10,000 items. Okay, so that's the gaps. So not only do we have an industry issue where we're not focused on the right side of the equation, which is productivity of the individual employee and their acceptance, adoption, and engagement with our solutions. But then we have these gaps in SharePoint that also need to be filled. So this is where Collabware CLM comes in. So with Collabware CLM, we're really focused on what we call intelligent information management. When we boil it down, Collabware CLM is an enterprise information governance and productivity software for SharePoint. That's what it is. That's what it does. It's information governance. It's for the enterprise, for public sector, and it increases productivity. But when we kind of drill a little further, well, what is it really doing? Well, it's going to help you find and file information quickly and efficiently. So we're going to address that first pain point. Let's make it quick, efficient, and let's automate as much as possible so that we can have those users put content in and not have to worry about our decrease in accuracy and not have to worry about them getting frustrated with how long it takes to actually contribute content. It protects your content and it mitigates risk. And what I mean by that is that it will understand based on your rules when something should become preserved and how long should we preserve it and when do we make it immutable. And once we make it immutable, what are we going to do from a retention disposition perspective? So we're going to protect it. We're going to embed all of that rules in automation that will automatically take place when users are working with content. They won't even see it. It'll be transparent to them unless they want to look. And this will mitigate the risk because now we know that everything can be automatically protected and controlled, and the users won't be trying to bypass it because they won't even know it's happening. It will meet your legal and regulatory requirements, and we're basically compliant with every standard out there. We're currently in the DoD certification process, and we're almost done. I am going to be so excited next quarter when I get to send out a beautiful press release about that being done. But it is almost done. We're almost DoD certified as well. We've been compliant for a long time, but the process itself is quite the workload to get through. But we're almost done, and for those of you who have that requirement, you can be rest assured you will have that certification in your hands in the new year. And what this all leads to is that we increase SharePoint adoption. We make it easier for users to use SharePoint. We make it more efficient. In fact, I will even argue we can make it more beneficial and more fun because we'll make searching easy. We'll make finding easy. That's the most important part of search. And we'll make this whole experience so transparent that what they were doing before, they'll go, wow, this is basically, I'm doing compliance, but I'm not doing compliance. This is fantastic. So some key features, and we're going to do a demo next. Case management, advanced case management. I'm going to show you pieces of that. I only have so much time, so I'm going to show you as much as I can. Lifecycle workflow, and please believe me, be prepared to be blown away. We have spent years of R&D on this system, and it's finally going to be shown to you, and it's amazing. We provide some precision metadata search technology. I won't have a lot of time to show that. I'll show bits and pieces of it though. Content surfacing as well, utilizing that metadata search technology. Why have users go find content when you can bring the content to them in a very personalized way? It's an amazing system. We have our outage tracking. I will show you some of that. Superseding and obsoleting functionality, rule-based security control that can be driven by metadata so that you can actually have users adding confidential documents to a system, marking them as confidential, and knowing that that information is secure. We have the reporting capabilities as well to know everything that's going on in the system everywhere. From a compliance perspective, it's physical and electronic content. Today, I'm only going to show electronic, but the physical capabilities are there for everything I mentioned: circulation control, location management, space management, all of the stuff that you would expect to do from a physical records capability are there and in SharePoint. All your file plan, taxonomy management, automated classification, time and event-based retention, disposition review, and we're going to go through a bunch of that. And of course, that DoD certification is pending. So, are you all excited? Are you ready? Because now it's time to take a look. It's time for a demonstration. All right, so I'm going to pop over to my virtual machine here. And we're going to take a look, and we're going to start in a standard SharePoint way. And I'm going to show you a little bit with our new email product as well. So here I am in my SharePoint 2013 portal. Now, it's of course important to note, everything I'm going to show you works in 2010, works in 2013, and will work in 2016 as well when it's released. What I want to do is I want to walk you through just the basics of everything all in one go. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our board site. And I like to use topics that everyone's familiar with, and I think we're all familiar with meetings and how we have agendas and we have meeting minutes, and we want to actually manage that content. But the great thing about meetings is sometimes they don't happen, and we want to manage that content as well. So I'm going to start by, we know we've got our next board meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and just add content, and I'm doing it in a quick and efficient way. I'm just uploading a document. But those of you familiar with SharePoint, this works no matter what way you want to put content in SharePoint. And when I add it, I've got a couple content types I can choose from. I'm either going to do agendas or I'm going to do documents. And this is that generic content type concept I was talking about. I don't have meeting agendas for every type of meeting. I have a meeting agenda content type, and I have a meeting type that is relevant. So we're going to go ahead and give this thing a name. We're going to do the October board meeting agenda. And notice I got this record classification field. So you know what, if you want to go with that old school approach of having users choose, because you can't be 100% automated, we can get like 90, 99, But in some cases you might need it, or in some cases you might want it. You can expose this for the users to drill in and make their selection on what this belongs to. So this might be executive board, or maybe it's going into human resources and going into or going into IT, or wherever you're putting this stuff. It's up to you. You can expose this to the end users to choose from. But that defeats the point of what I'm getting at. So let's not do that. Instead, let's rely on things that the users use. Things they use to search, sort, filter, and group by. That's what they like, and that's what we want to focus on. So I would definitely do filtering by the state of the document. I'm going to do filtering based on the type of meeting. This is a board meeting. I'm definitely going to use date grouping, so I want to know everything about dates. I want to show you a time effect of how we can actually have the state of content change over time. So in order to do that, I'm going to put the meeting at today for now, but then we're going to backdate it so I can show you what would happen if time went by. And I'm just going to hit save. I've put my document in. I've got it in here. It's great. But you know what? What if this meeting never happens? And this document's just going to sit here forever. We've all seen it. You probably all have it in your SharePoint right now. We need to manage everything, not just records. So I'm going to show you the not transparent part. We're going to pretend a user is very curious and they want to go into lifecycle details. And what they're going to see in lifecycle details is a few things. They're going to see, for example, every piece of content gets a 10-character alphanumeric globally unique identifier. Even if you're in a multi-farm SharePoint scenario, we get farms all over the world, this thing is unique. And it stays with the document, and you can link to this document using it, and no matter where that document goes, it'll always find it. We can also see the category was automatically selected. We didn't pick it, but there it is. The ADM02 Executive Board category was chosen. You'll just have to ignore this little GUID thing. I've got a little debugging that was going on, and I turned that on, but normally you just see the label. So I would look at this as a user and I'd say, okay, this is Executive Board, but how did it know? And that was the rule system controlled and configured by the records management, information governance, compliance team, whoever's owning that aspect of the information can, in a central location, configure all the rules to figure out what everything is and what category it should go into and not have to have the user choose. We can see we've got our draft state and all that wonderful stuff. We can also see we have an audit trail developing, so I can view this on a per item basis. So if I want to create this agenda and then circulate it to a bunch of people, I could simply come and look at this audit trail and see who's viewed it, because we track those as well. I could look and say, oh, Jim, I sent that out to you, but you didn't even look at it. I would know because the audit trail shows me that Jim didn't look at it. But really the most powerful thing here is Lifecycle, and I'm going to show you the Workflow tab. Now this is the visual representation of the lifecycle that's going to be applied to this content. I know there's oohs and ahs out there right now, and that's okay. You can ooh and ah. What this is showing me is that we're currently in a state where we're going to retain this content for 1 year or until final, which means if I mark it final, we're going to progress. If not, we're going to put it through review. Because if this thing just sits here for a year, I don't necessarily want to keep it anymore. Now, you might not want to put it through review. Maybe you send an email to the last person who modified it saying, hey, administrator, you got 90 days to tell me if this thing's going to be useful or not, or we're going to just delete it. And then they can come in and take an action on it and change the behavior of that workflow. All of that can be modeled centrally and managed, and then the user is simply interacting with it through metadata, through the normal things that they do, but can visually come in and take a look at what's happening. So we're gonna move this process along. I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna edit it, and this thing was worked on, and we got to a state where we made it final. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark it final. And now if we go back and look in, we're going to see that the workflow has now progressed. The item got preserved, which means I can't delete it anymore. It's also been retained, and now it's waiting for the meeting to complete. So when we look at the properties here, we're going to see a couple new things. Look, active record state. This is actually a record now. The user didn't even know. It just happened. But it's not immutable because I might still edit the agenda right up until the meeting takes place. But after the meeting is done, you cannot edit it anymore. And I mark it immutable. So if I go back to my document and I try and hit delete on this, it's going to say, no can do. This thing is protected. So now time passes and the meeting date elapses. So now I'm going to go ahead and pretend that happened. This is that time effect I was talking about. I'm going to put the meeting back in October. So time has passed and the engine's going to look at it and say, oh, okay, well, I got to progress my workflow. When I hit refresh, notice it's got its lock badge now because I cannot edit it anymore. And you'll notice I cannot edit. It is now immutable. And when we go and look at the lifecycle details, we're going to see that it progressed past all these things, and now it's in a retain 5 years from meeting date state. And I can go back and click on these, and you'll see over here on the right, I can see when these happened. When did we preserve it? Well, here's when we did it. And I can see I've got a couple outcomes here. I've got a review outcome, so it's just 5 years from now on October 1st, 2020, it is going to go to review. But we can't wait that long. So what I want to do is show you event-based activities. So I can see I've got a second line here, which is called Start Review Early. And that is an event, and it could be anything. But what's interesting about it is I could have never triggered that event until I got to this state. I can't say start the review early when I'm still in this previous retain state. I need to wait until I get to the appropriate point, and then I can process further. And that's the business process automation aspect of dealing with Lifecycle. I'm here now. This is an option for me. So if I want to apply this event, I will just simply start review early, trigger that. It's going to show me what will happen. Okay, what's going to happen is we're going to lead to a review. That's what I want. Good. Trigger it. Now it'll happen. If my event was configured to accept a date so that the event can be triggered as of a date, then I would be asked to fill in the date. When did this event happen? And now when we look at the workflow, we can see it has progressed into a review state, which has two possible outcomes. We either destroy the item or we retain it for another year and it'll cycle back. So this is kind of, we're going through and doing all this activity, but really the user, all they did is they put a document in. They filled out the metadata that was relevant to them so that they could do their sorting by or grouping by meeting date. They worked it through a process, marked it final at some point and said, yeah, we're done. The meeting date just happened to go by. It just passed and the item became immutable. To the end user, there was no actual compliance, but yet there was. So we've mitigated the risk and we were completely simple, seamless, and transparent. And this is the outcome we want to achieve with everything. Now, we put this item up for review. So I want to take a little detour here and I want to show you bulk review and what that actually looks like. So I'm going to disappear over to my Record Center tab here, which is just another location in SharePoint. This is the centralized CLM location. We call it a Record Center. It's designed for absolutely massive scalability. It's not just one site collection or one content database. This thing can scale to just enormous volumes of content, and it all does it automatically. You don't even need to worry about it. CLM takes care of it. We can see that if I want to, I can navigate through my hierarchical file plans so I can view content in those various categories, provided I have permissions. But what we're after is we're going to jump into lifecycle management. And in lifecycle management, I've got my review lists. Now, as a user, I could access this from anywhere in SharePoint through my personalized dashboard. But I want to show you the administrative side, so I've come here instead. If I was a regular user, part of a review, I'd get an email, I can see it in my dashboard, and I would only see the reviews I'm participating in. So here we've got the one that we were looking at, which we can see our workflow outcomes: destroy, retain 1 year. We've got our destruction review, and we have 3 items currently queued up. What's really powerful about the review system is it will basically manage self-starting behavior. I can identify a threshold that I want to have achieved, and if that threshold is met, automatically start the review. You can have it manual if you want, but most people tend to like automation. So in this case, it's saying if I get 200 items queued up for this particular review, or my next quarterly time period elapses, and you can control what time period you want, then go ahead and start the review automatically. And then those emails would just automatically happen. People would automatically come in and do the review, and the records management team wouldn't need to be in there trying to figure out, are we supposed to do the review or not, and tracking spreadsheets and all that wonderful stuff. It's all dealt with automatically right here. Now, of course, we're not going to wait for 200 items or January 1st, so you can manually start these things if you want. I'm going to go ahead and start this one. This would send out the notification to all the users that are included to participate, and I can add additional ones if I'd like. And they would get that one email telling them it's time to review. And that review email would link them into the review display. Now, the review display can be, as I said, accessed from anywhere. And what the review display is going to show us is it's going to show us all the items that are up for review. So we only have 3 in this particular case. It's going to show us metadata about these. If we want to see additional metadata, we can simply say, I want to see some more. Show me the meeting date as a date field. We don't want the time. Let's go ahead and move it up a couple notches because I want it with name and meeting date. And let's go ahead and save that. So now it's going to show me my meeting dates. And if I want, I can sort by those. I can filter by columns. In this case, I only have the one modified column, but I can filter. I can group. So for example, let's group by meeting date and see my groups. So this is a tool for me to come in and do review. Now, what's interesting is multiple people could be reviewing different things. It depends on your rules and what you've configured. In my case, I've said that the last person who modified one of these items is the one to do the review. But I could equally say, no, it's all centralized. Here's the group of people who do reviews. Or maybe it varies by record classification, or maybe it varies by some metadata field. You've got all sorts of power on how you want to carve out your review. And it's up to you to just define, this is how we do our business. And when you embed those rules in here, it will automatically manage it for you. It will show you the activity of what's going on. Well, we created and started, we haven't done anything yet. But as a user now, I can come in and deal with these. These are my items to review. So I'm going to go ahead and check out my list. I want to now choose outcomes for these. And I have to choose outcomes for all items before the processing can complete. So when I select items, my various outcomes, which are configured in my workflow, and you can have as many as you want, are all defined here. As you can see, I haven't confirmed any yet. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yep, let's go ahead and destroy these items. And I can turn around and say, for example, if I wanted to, let's go ahead and I'm going to remove my filter here. Let's go ahead and take this item and I could say delay destruction. But that's the one we created, so I kind of want to destroy it too, so that I can show you that it disappears. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to just confirm that. But I could put it in delay. All items have now been assigned. Do I want to start? Yep, please do. And ta-da! Behind the scenes, those items are being dealt with. Now it's a job that runs that makes that happen. When that job is done, it will generate a certificate of disposition for us. I'm going to go ahead and just kick off that job in the background so that it'll run, and we'll come back and look in just a moment. So now we've done our bulk review. We could have done 10,000 items. We could have done 1 million items. It wouldn't have mattered. I also want to give you a quick tour on some other things, and then we're going to get into another part of the demonstration. So aggregates. This is case management. Aggregates of information. You can define the different types that you have. For example, the employee file. What metadata do I want to capture about one of these things? Well, I want to know the employee's name, the position, the department, start date, and if there was a termination date, I might want to know that too. But not only that, the aggregates can define when you create one of these things, well, if I associate items to it, I want the values from my aggregate to populate the values on the content. So which values do I want to populate? And here I've got, if there's a candidate name field on the content, I want to populate it with the employee name. If there's an employee name field on the content, I want to populate it with that. So you're able to actually deal with what we call metadata inheritance. So when something gets associated to this aggregate, what values will it inherit? You can also go back after the fact and do an edit and have all those items be updated automatically as well. So bulk metadata updating is a possibility. In addition, you can control security for these, who can create them, who can see them, who can do anything with them. And you can define whether or not, in certain cases, you want to spin up SharePoint sites to represent one of these things. If I create a capital project, I actually want to spin up a capital project team site using my template in a particular location automatically. So the governance of site creation is embedded into this as well. From a compliance perspective, those of you familiar with CLM will recognize this is very similar. I've got my hierarchical file plan, and for each of these items, I can go ahead and manage whether or not it has a repository, a centralized archive repository in the Record Center. You don't have to have one, but you can choose. I can define the different policies that are in place. So here I can see for my employee files, I have 2 different policies. Employees get treated one way, contractors get treated another. And if I click on one of these, I can actually see the entirety of the workflow that is going to apply in the case that that item is selected or that policy is applied. And from a workflow perspective, if I wanted to, say, for example, edit or modify that workflow, I can just simply come into my workflow section. We'll select our employee file policy. Here it is. I can simply click design and enter the designer. No coding is necessary. I could just simply drop on one of my actions and have that action embedded into my workflow, and using simple configurations. So for example, some property forms, fill out this, what property do I want to populate with a specific value or with something calculated? How do I want to do that? And I can manage all of that here without writing any code. Now, if you want to have specific actions to talk to your line of business systems, you can easily add them as custom actions. So it's fully flexible, but it really is designed to be a no-code, analyst-driven workflow system for Lifecycle. So that's a quick tour on some of the administrative stuff. Today's not about administration, it's about end users. So let's go back and take a look at our meetings. Guess what? They're all gone. They all got deleted. The job ran, did its thing, and it's done. It also generated for us a certificate of disposition, which I'm just going to come in and view here. So let's go ahead and find our latest one. There it is. Open it up. It's a PDF-A document, contains all of the information about the process, how many items, what were the outcomes, who participated, what comments did it leave, who marked what on what, and all the items and their metadata, and you can control what metadata you want to include. So you have your artifact for long-term preservation, and really highlights your defensible disposition processes. So one last thing I want to show before we part is this case management thing I've been talking about, and I want to just briefly touch on it because we don't have a lot of time to deal with it. We're going to walk a scenario really quickly on an employee. Now, to do that, I want to pop over to Outlook real quick because this is really where it all starts. In Outlook, I get an email, and that email has attachments about a possible candidate we want to hire. I'm in HR, so I think, well, that's great, but I'm going to go ahead and put that in SharePoint. So using our Collab Space add-in, we can go ahead and just say, I'm going to navigate through my SharePoint locations. I've got my portal, human resources, candidate files, got a whole bunch of candidates in here. That's great. I want to select my two attachments, and I want to add those two. And this is going to add them right into SharePoint. So it goes ahead and it does the upload on them. Now, I want to just take a look at some of my fields here. Okay, great. Got my classification, same thing we saw here. I don't know the department or position for this individual, and both these files pertain to the same candidate. So I'm just going to go ahead and type that individual's name. Type it properly. Okay, Sal, this is the candidate's name. We're going to use it for some of our processing. So I'm going to go ahead and share this metadata value. So by clicking this thing on the right, I'm sharing it across all these files. So if we go look at this other one, we'll see that the Sal Barrett's value is already there. Okay, great. And yep, just save them all. Put them in SharePoint. Done. That's easy. I'm pretty happy with that as a user. I just added stuff to SharePoint. And if I want to go see some metadata values in this location, I can go ahead and see all these metadata values. Look at that. But it's all about that simple activity. If I wanted to, I could move these items. So I did a drag, so I copied, but I can move them. If I want the attachments to go in and be removed from the email, I can do that. If I want the whole email to go in, I can do that. You got a lot of flexibility and power here, and this is really designed for your end users to be able to do stuff. There's some other really great features in this around team collaboration and chat. I won't get into too much detail, but I've got some chat going around some of our activities as well. But that's all there for you to collaborate and have that simple experience. Now, to bring it back to our world of cases, on our human resources site, this is where we create and manage all our employee files. So we have that aggregate we defined. I want to go ahead and create an instance of that. So I want to create a new one because this Sal guy, he turned out to be pretty cool. So we want to hire him. So I'm going to create, and you'll notice all of our data across all of our system is multilingual capable. So I currently have English and French here, but we support English, French, and Spanish, and can easily support other languages as well. And unlike having a single field that has split text, I can actually manage these values independently as well. Berenson. All right, so Sal Berenson's employee file, and I'm going to go ahead and hit OK on that. We'll open it today. Yeah, that sounds great. The employee's name is Sal Berenson. That's going to be relevant for pushing down to content and associating content automatically. And his position is going to be a VP of security, and his department is going to be in product development. And this is relevant because any content out there with Sal Berenson's name, I want these values to push down. And we're going to say Sal starts next week. Pretty fast hire. Go ahead and create. I've now got this thing called Sal Behrens' employee file that can be searched for using normal SharePoint search, using our content surfacing capability, can be linked into, and when I link into it, I get a full display of everything about Sal Berenson and his employee file. So here's all his metadata. I can change security. Right now, only HR can see these things. I can manage workflow. I don't have one right now. I'm going to show that in a moment. And I can see content associated to this thing. And that content can live anywhere. Now, that can also happen automatically. When I added this employee file, I have a rule behind the scenes that says find any content out there where the candidate name or the employee name value matches the name on one of my employee files and automatically associate it. Now, to do that, I actually have to run a couple jobs. So I'm going to go ahead. Actually, I don't have to run those jobs. I'm going to shortcut this. This is going to be even faster. I'm going to go into my candidate files. So where we did our upload, I'm just going to touch them. So what I want to do is I want to check them out and check them in again. That causes them to be reevaluated, and that way I don't have to wait for my jobs. So there we go. We checked it out, and we'll just check them back in again. And then we come back to our display for Sal. So if I had waited for the jobs to run, and I come here and I just hit refresh, there they are, automatically associated. I didn't have to go and do it. I can go and manually associate stuff. So if I want to find stuff, do a search, keywords, metadata precision search, do my query and find stuff and automatically associate it, I can do that. But this happened without me having to do that. So that's one of those very powerful aspects of the aggregate system, is it will find the content and automatically associate it for you. On top of that, it will push those values down. So if I go ahead and I'm going to run one other job real quick, this should just take a moment, and I'll show you that those values actually get updated as well. Okay, I think that ran. Let's go ahead and take a look and see if it did. I'm going to refresh my library. Oh, hasn't quite run yet. Well, you can see with the others, I won't wait for it any longer because I know we're close on time, but you'll see with the others that value will, when that job is finished, will go ahead and populate all of that value, the values from the aggregate down onto the content automatically. The last piece I want to show about this is that what if it's not an employee file? What if it's something that does have a site? I've got this thing called a capital project I've created called automated billing system. It's another aggregate using a specific type. And when I click on it, I'll see the same kind of display I see with the other one. I've got some more content associated with this, a bunch of different stuff. I can do my filtering of stuff. And I can see that I've got a site associated to this. This is a custom site that was spun up automatically for this thing. And I've got a bunch of documents, and this is content surfacing in action. You can see how many documents I have here associated to this thing, but only some of them live here. And some of these things are in fact confidential. I have permission to them. But to show you how the confidential management took place, it's also part of the workflow. And it uses metadata values to drive it. So you can see the history. It was added and retained, and then it was marked legal confidential. And what that is a little metadata value down here called project confidentiality, where I picked one of my values that I defined and automatically changed the security on the item. So only members of legal confidential can see this, but all the rest of the people on this team site can see the rest of the content. So you get a lot of power and a lot of flexibility in this case management. So that's kind of the highlight of what I wanted to show. We're pretty much right at the top of the hour, and I'm going to switch back to my slide deck because I have one more slide, which is questions. I know that was a whirlwind tour. I would love to sit here and show you absolutely everything in the product because it's amazing, but I hope that you sufficiently were blown away by some of these advancements. So with that, I'm going to jump right into questions, and there are a lot of them queued up. So I'm going to go through all of them. You're welcome to stick around as long as you want, and we'll answer all these questions. All right, so I'm going to start at the top. So how is the declared record button differ in CLM 2016 from previous versions? That's a great question. So in previous versions, we had this big button that said declare record. Now, the way that works in the new system is you actually start a workflow. So it's a slightly different take on the same thing. It's still one click. It's whether you're clicking a button or clicking a workflow, start a workflow, but you would actually click the start workflow versus the click declare record, because you might be doing a lot more than just declaring. So that concept is still there and you can still do it, but it's embedded in this now framework of workflow. There's a couple other questions about direct contact, that's always interesting. Are you surfacing content using Microsoft Office Graph API? No, not currently. Our technology is actually a little different because we're utilizing, this is all on-premise type demonstration I was showing here, and we utilize our own querying engine and capability to find content that we're looking for and surface it. We actually do have some innovations around machine learning that are going to be coming out throughout 2016, but that's not in what you saw here today. Is an uploaded document copied or moved? That was earlier in the presentation, so I'm going to guess in this particular case it was when I did my very first upload, and in that case it's a copy because I did upload something from my desktop into SharePoint, and when you do that, it's just natural SharePoint behavior that it's not deleting the copy that was uploaded. If you wanted to restrict that, there are some tricks and challenges you can do around that, but that's just standard SharePoint capability that when you upload something, it doesn't remove the copy from your desktop or from your file system. Does the product work seamlessly in Office 365 cloud environment? Another great question. The answer is this one I showed you right now, not right now, but that is actually coming and very quickly. And every feature you saw in this demonstration is going to be in our cloud service. So watch for it. You're going to see some announcements throughout the early part of 2016 into mid 2016. And it's a very, very comprehensive initiative that we undertook starting a year ago. A little over a year ago, and it's well underway, and it's going to make a big appearance because we did not do what everyone else did when it came to the cloud. Just like everything else we do in Collabware, we think differently, and we did some really, really amazing innovations around things like machine learning and massive volume of content management. Another question, how do you delegate a new owner reviewer to a document that was posted 4 years ago? The original owner is no longer with the position with the company. Another great question. That can all be managed with our centralized ACL system. Now, our centralized ACLs can be abstract from the individuals themselves. So for example, you might have a group called legal reviewers, for example. So the people who are responsible for reviewing all legal matters for disposition. The membership in that group can change over time without issue, and you could simply take people who are no longer with the company and remove them and add people who are joining the company. So it's very, very simple to manage. What if a user doesn't enter the document as final? If the date of the meeting passes, then does the document automatically change to locked? Fantastic question again. And in this case, the answer would be no, because the workflow state can only progress based on the options it has. I didn't provide an option to make it immutable if it wasn't marked final first. You could have done that though. So if I wanted my workflow to work that way, I can easily do that by simply dragging another line off of that particular state and providing the linkage to my immutability action. So very easy to accommodate that approach if you want, but that's not how my particular workflow is configured. Can I apply the lifecycle on a document set? Absolutely, yes, you can. It applies to every piece of content in SharePoint, including list items. How efficient is this when there are 500K items waiting to be reviewed? Well, that's a great question. I would say that it's considerably more efficient than 500,000 emails showing up in your inbox based on the out-of-the-box behavior. But in terms of if I have 500,000 items that are coming up for review, and I need to have them either in one or more of my review lists, it's extremely efficient to do it. It really comes down to what are you looking for in your review, because that isn't going to change. What your review is looking to find out about these items in terms of whether or not you're going to approve it is going to be the case no matter what technology or what you're using, and that's what's going to take you more time. But as far as can I have 500 items in one list, go through some refinement and filtering, looking for specific things, and then give it a yes or no and have all items dealt with? Absolutely, not an issue at all. Another question, can I apply the lifecycle on a folder that will then be applied to all documents in the folder? That one is, the answer is no, because the way our lifecycle engine works is it is agnostic to how you structure SharePoint. It doesn't care what you do with SharePoint for your end user collaborative purposes. If all your stuff in one folder is related, that's great. If it's not related or you got stuff all over the place, that's fine too. The way you would do it is if you had a very precise need like that, for some particular reason you had to manage all the things in this folder the same way, then you would craft your rule in our centralized system to just simply identify that that folder is going to be treated differently. But the idea is to escape that thinking that you have to have everything location based. You can if you want, but there's so much more power available if you don't. What is the prompt for users failing to review records ready for destruction? You will actually be, receive an email notification when it's time to do the review. If the review elapses, you can actually have some functionality around that as well, where you actually notify again. There are some notification emails that you can take advantage of to make sure that people are actually doing it. But ultimately, I mean, in the end, you can't force someone, right? They're a person. So you need to still have some sort of general governance policy in place into, if a review's been sitting there for 3 months beyond when it was expected to complete, what action do you plan to take? And that's something you would still want to define, but there are notification emails you can take advantage of. Does Collabware support multilingual SharePoint platform, for example, French? Yes, absolutely. You can have pure French, pure Spanish, pure English, combinations of. You can have different parts of the system using different things. It's completely up to you, and it's all truly multilingual. Is there a cross-reference table that can be defined to assign the reviewers by organizational unit? Yeah, there's a few different ways you can actually do this. You can do it using the rule system. You can do it using metadata. You can do it using workflow. It all depends on which one's going to suit your needs the best. But absolutely, you can have the automated decision-making. I got a piece of content. I need to look at it in some regard and determine which reviewer it should go to, and that can be managed. Another question about whether it's on-premise or Office 365. Currently, what I'm showing you is on-premise. It work in hybrid cloud, but when it comes to a full Office 365 solution, that's coming in 2016. And let's see, we got more here. These great questions. I love it. Can you please explain how it handles legal holds? That's fantastic. I apologize I wasn't able to demonstrate that for you in this particular go-around. But the way legal holds work is you can create and define a legal hold, and you can define the criteria for information that should be associated to that hold using our precision query. That content can then automatically be added to the hold as it arrives or if it exists in the environment currently. And then anything that's on hold, of course, is not subject to any sort of disposition action. If it's already on a review list, that's going to prevent those items from being dispositioned. If they are not already on a review list, it will prevent them from coming up for disposition until that hold is removed. So all of the legal hold capability you could possibly desire is available. If the same email, if the same saved email, other user try to save it again. I think what they're trying to say is if a user tries to save the same email that someone else has already put in SharePoint, what happens? And in that case, just like SharePoint, it would treat it as a document overwrite. If it's got the same name and everything, it's a document overwrite. If it's two different names, then it would put two different files in. What we do is we actually take all the email data, the to, the from, the subject, all that stuff, and that gets added as metadata as well, so that you could actually see that the subject is the same, even though I might have changed the name of the MSG file itself. Lots of questions around 365, so I'm going to pass by those because I think I've answered those. Do you need to upgrade to SharePoint 2016? No, absolutely not. It will run in SharePoint 2010, 2013, and 2016. Can you handle multiple FPs? I'm not sure what the FP is going to stand for in this particular case, so that's a tough question to answer. We have division level FPs and single corporate admin FP. One of my team members is telling me file plan. That makes sense. So can you handle multiple? The answer is no. Yes and no. It's a little complicated, but by default, there's one service application that gets deployed with our software, and that service application can manage multiple farms. There can only be one file plan for that service application, but you can manage the security around it so that you can carve off different parts of that file plan for your different divisions. If you really, really want to have more than one file plan, you will need to have more than one service application. And that gets a little trickier, but it is possible. Typical recommendation is use the security capabilities to carve out the file plan as needed. Does CLM rely fully on SharePoint, or does it require dedicated backend servers? It relies fully on SharePoint. You do not need extra hardware. I cannot say that enough. You do not need extra hardware. It fully scales and is managed as part of SharePoint, and it runs as a service application in SharePoint. So if your technical team is familiar with running SharePoint, they're going to be familiar with running CLM. Does CLM aggregates affected by SharePoint metadata limitations? No, I would say absolutely not. We can capture whatever metadata we want on our aggregates, and we will push it down as needed. We actually have a separation layer between SharePoint metadata and the metadata we manage. That also allows us to manage content without requiring the use of the content type hub, which is a limitation we had in our previous edition. That is no longer a limitation in the current edition. Is there a workflow to move to a trusted digital repository? Yes, there is to our repositories, but if you had an external repository you wanted to move stuff to, what would be considered a transfer, you can easily add any custom action for your particular repository if that's what you would like to do. Very simple to do and supports really any outcome. How is CLM priced? Per user, instance, else? Great question. I love the pricing questions. CLM is priced per user, and it's priced on a subscription basis. Obviously, there are always exceptions to all rules. Some organizations do not like that model. We have alternatives, but that is the standard, is this per user based on volume of users and based on subscription. Do you have the ability to document why a document is on hold? Can you assign more than one reason? Yes, when you actually utilize our legal holds, there is a full description type capability, and you can have multiple holds on a document at the same time, and until they're all removed, it will not be subject to disposition. So you can actually have multiple holds, multiple reasons, and it's all presented to authorized users. Can you bulk release documents that are on hold for the same reason? Yes, absolutely. You can just simply, you can choose to remove things individually, or you can just say release the entire hold and all items will be released. All right, so we actually went a little bit over, obviously, but those are great questions, and that was the last one. So thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate your attendance and your enthusiasm towards our product, and I hope to speak to you again in the near future. Thank you.